prefer people for us to call on people? Because I know on Zoom sometimes 3 people speak and then everyone is silent. So who prefers us to call on them? Couple people. All right. So sounds good. So Carrie, I think you were brave. You had your finger up first. Maybe you can start your introduction.
Oh, that bravery gets me every time. I am Carrie Horton, coordinator for Human Unified Making Advances. And one thing I'm hoping is just streamlining it. I recently got to use the online platform for submitting a contract, so just streamlining it, making sure I've got all my ducks in a row.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Naomi, would you be willing to share with us an introduction and what you're hoping to learn?
Yes, so I'm Naomi and I'm the administrative assistant for Nelly for Sharing and Rising Together for Equity, and I'm new, so I'm still hoping to learn the whole thing and how the basics go. That way I can make sure I can do everything correctly. So yes.
Great, and since you sort of introduced Nelly, Nelly, do you want to introduce yourself as well? And you're muted, I think.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nelly Lyman, and I'm the coordinator for Sharing and Rising Together for Equity. And just, I'm here, and I would like to learn it's kind of difficult with the new system, like online thing. So I want to make sure I'm doing everything correctly and all that.
Excellent, thanks, Nelly. And Jay, you're up near the top of at least my screen. I don't know if we all see each other in the same order. So introduce yourself.
I'm Jay Warner, and I'm the coordinator for Antonito Together in Region 3. And what I'm hoping to learn today is how to make my contracts stronger and more so I can hold the person that we're contracting with more accountable.
Excellent, that's really important. Rhonda, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Rhonda Lancaster from Dove Creek, the community voice, and I'm really wanting to learn the whole process. We have a lot of contracts and it seems like each one I at least do one thing wrong. So I would like to just see the whole process.
Excellent. We hope that we can share enough that it's easier to get those through. Malia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Malia Munson. I work for Dr. Mac, which is the Denver Regional Mobility and Access Council. We help older adults and people with disabilities gain access to transportation in the Denver metro area. And today I'm really just kind of looking for a general knowledge, you know, start to finish on contracts, especially so that I can get everything I need on the front end and not have to, you know, give it to you guys and then we get it back and, you know, keep going back and forth. It's nice to just have it solid from the get-go.
Agree. And Malia, it looks like behind you, you have multiple forms of transportation. You have cars and you have a ship. So I like your commitment to transportation. Whitney, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Whitney Stuberg, and I am now the Executive Director of El Sistema Colorado. And I think what I want to get out of today is just ways that I can stop driving Steph really crazy with contracts. So, yeah.
Great. And Candace, have you introduced yourself?
Not yet. I'm Candace. I'm with the Colorado Jewish Early Childhood Education Initiative, and I'm looking to learn today. I'm still relatively new. I've only been with the organization for about a couple months, so just kind of like an overview of the.
Great. And Sandy, would you mind introducing yourself?
You bet. You guys, it is so neat to hear all of your stories, and I wish we could find out exactly all what you guys are doing, but thank you for the important work you're all doing. Sandy Austin, Executive Director of the Bionic Team, stands for Believe It or Not, I Care, a school club to try to prevent suicides and school shootings, just letting kids know people care.
Excellent. And Judy, Judith, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Julie. My name is Judith Gurule, and I'm the community coordinator for Adelante San Luis here in Region 3. And I just recently made a boo-boo on contract. So I just want to, first of all, I've not used the online process. So take a look at that, and then just make sure that a refresher, but not a refresher. So I just want to make sure I make your job easier and I'm doing everything correctly.
And Judith, we all make boo-boos. I make boo-boos, Steph makes boo-boos. Probably everyone on this call has made a contracting boo-boo, which is why we thought this call might be a helpful thing to have.
Yes, thank you.
And I am not sure if I see everyone. Are there folks on the phone who have not introduced themselves?
I have not. I'm Phoebe Becerra in Fort Morgan, Region 1, and I'm the interim coordinator for Fort Morgan Cultures United for Progress. I'm here as a refresher course and just to make sure that I'm doing things right.
Thanks, Phoebe. We're glad you're here. And since I think my screen doesn't have everyone, if those who are on the phone who haven't introduced themselves, if they could just introduce themselves now, I won't call on you because I can't see your name now.
We do have, pardon me, one gal joining us, Lauren. Lauren's audio is still likely connecting. We were having some trouble letting her in. So I'll put her on the spot when her audio connects. And we'd love to hear from you, Lauren, which we're just doing a brief introduction, who you are, where you're from, and what you're hoping to get out of this training.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Lauren Money, and I am from Bank on Denver. And Bank on Denver focuses on getting those that are unbanked or underbanked, helping get them banked into affordable banking products and other services, and kind of steer them away from costly alternative products.
Perfect. And I will not pretend to be a like a Zoom pro. Can you guys see the notes that I'm typing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Just checking. I was like, maybe I'm just doing this for myself. I have no idea. Great. Well, let me know if things don't work well and we'll try to adjust them. But thank you for your feedback.
And before Steph and I introduce ourselves, is there anyone else on the phone who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves? Okay. I'm Julie, and Steph and I together work to manage the contracting process at CNDC. And we also know that it could be easier and more streamlined. So what I would like to learn are pain points for you guys, so that if there are things we can change to make them easier, we know what those are and can do those.
Perfect. Should we dive in?
Yes.
Awesome. So we covered these in the initial emails and kind of with the invitations, but in addition to what you guys are hoping to cover, we're also hoping to cover these goals. Basically just a good review of when do you need a contract, how do you get one in place. I know a lot of you have used the prior system, the kind of like paper, not electronic system. So we'll cover the newer Formsite to DocuSign system. Julie's going to cover different compensation options for working with contractors so you can really strengthen that piece of your contract. We'll actually have Debbie join us and she will review the ICQ. I think a lot of times when we fill it out, we're like, I don't really know, but I hope this works so they can be a contractor. I don't really want to bring them on as an employee. And it's kind of a guessing game of how to answer those questions. So she'll give us some clarity around what that really looks like and why we ask for that. And then we'll also look at the procurement policy, what it is, when do you need to follow it, what kind of documentation looks like, etc. And then I guess I just want to add that We want this process to be as smooth for you guys as possible. We know that your lives are so full and so busy, and we know that processes can be limiting and not fun. And we want to make it as positive of an experience as possible. So thank you guys for joining us today so we can make it smooth from your end to our end and back.
So our next kind of thing is, when do we need a contract? So one thing that's important to distinguish is when we're buying goods. So if we're buying computer equipment, I'm trying to think, food, a refrigerator, all of these types of things, we actually don't need a contract. So for those types of things, you could just go online and buy them and expense them. So really, when we're thinking about contracts, we're really thinking about our services. Now, sometimes we might buy a good and the vendor may say, here's our contract. And if the vendor gives you a contract, then that has to go through our contracting process. We're happy to do contracts for goods if the vendor or if your agency just feels like, yeah, this one is a little squirrely. We want to make sure we have this contract in place. So we will do contracts for goods, but we don't require them for goods. But for services, we require them in our threshold because we don't want you doing a contract every time, you know, maybe you have a plumber because your plumbing is backed up. We don't want to make you stop, do a contract, and then call someone. So we really look at a threshold of $1,000 per year for a service. Under $1,000 if the contractor requests it. So there are some contractors who will say, oh, we do contracts with everyone, so can you do this contract? And of course the answer is yes. And then we really, when certain types of licensed professionals are used, it really makes sense to do a contract. You may not be required because you may not hit the $1,000 threshold, but there's certain things, for example, if we're using a licensed psychologist, if we're using somebody who is serving food and so they need to have food servicing licenses, if we're using anyone who has a medical or legal background, we are going to want to make sure that those folks have the appropriate, that they're in good standing with their association that sort of, or DORA, the Department of Regulations, that sort of says, yes, this person's nursing background is in good standing. So if you're hiring somebody who has a specialty where they would have a licensure through the state or some other system, we encourage you to put the contract through, because otherwise, if you put the contract through, we'll make sure that, in fact, we have the documents we need to make sure that they are in good standing. If you put it through without that, so maybe you're hiring a nurse for $700 to do an assessment of your early childhood program. If it turns out that that person actually isn't a nurse and we didn't check the paperwork and it didn't go through our contracting process, then the individual who hired that nurse is sort of the responsible party. So just to sort of help you make sure that we have everything we need, there's certain licensed professionals where if I were you, I would put a contract through, because that way CNDC will say, yep, we make sure that this psychologist, in fact, is in good standing with the board, things like that. And then also, raise of hands, how many of you have heard about our abuse prevention policy? I hope everyone. But anytime we have a contractor or a staff member or a volunteer working with kids, there is a large, I want to say 13-page document of things that need to happen. One of them being a background check, as well as them sort of looking at all these policies, saying that they need them or understand them, you working with them to make sure that the work that you're doing actually abides by the policies. So we really recommend it when working with kids, because then our team will go, oh, you're going to hire Sherry as a babysitter for your meeting. Let's make sure that she has that background check. So if it's under $1,000 and you don't put it through CNDC, then you are responsible for making sure that everything that should happen for this contractor does happen. And with licensed professionals and anyone working with kids, it's complex. So I would recommend, I think it will take time and worry off of you to just put a contract through for folks who are doing those things.
And then just a quick clarifier, Julie. Ooh, sorry. The goods piece, the $1,000 threshold, if the threshold is over $1,000, I'm sorry, if the contract is over $1,000, but it's for 10 laptops, should they have a contract in place?
They do not need to until we hit a much larger threshold, which we'll go into later in this. So I think it's like 125,000, but I actually will look at the slide for that. So 10 laptops, what you would, and we'll get this into this with the procurement policy. You're going to buy 10 laptops and say they're costing $600 a piece, so that's a $6,000 purchase. We would want to follow our procurement policy, which tells us that we should price it 3 different sources. So maybe we check Amazon, maybe we check TechSoup, and maybe we check Best Buy, and we might do a screen print of what that laptop costs at each of those places and keep those in our files. But you don't need to have a contract in place. Thanks, Steph. That was a great question.
Perfect. So I wanted to review kind of the process of how to get a contract in place. So it starts over here. Do you see my cursor by any chance?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. It starts over here with the contract initiation form, and this is new as of January. So you'll go to a form that we'll look at actually at the end of this training, but you'll go to the contract initiation form online. You'll say, okay, this is a lease. You'll put in the address, you'll put in the cost of the lease, you'll put in the term, etc. And I'm the one who gets a copy of that. So as soon as I get it, I do my thing on the back end. So I start prepping it for Julie. Julie reviews it, which might include a phone call back to you or an email back to you to say, hey, you know, it looks like you indicated that this lease is for 5 years. Like, let's talk about what that might look like. That's a large liability. Maybe we want to look at a year lease, etc. So she might have some clarifying questions for you. And then it goes back to me when it's ready, and we send it out through DocuSign. A quick show of hands if you have used DocuSign before, whether it was through CNDC or not. Okay, so most people have. It's super easy, or it's fairly easy. It's fairly intuitive, but you do have to do it a couple times mostly to feel comfortable with it. But as soon as it goes out through DocuSign, you'll be the first person who reviews, or you'll be the first non-CNDC team member to review it. So you'll make sure what we put together looks good. You'll do one last review to make sure that that's a contract you want to enter into, and then you'll sign it and it'll go to your vendor. Now this is a little bit different of a process if you have a vendor supplied contract, but this is for our traditional ICA. So as soon as they get it, then they review it, and then it goes to Angela, and Angela signs it. And once she signs it, everybody should get an email straight to their inbox with the executed contract. So when this is working well, this process is very smooth and very fast. Sometimes it doesn't feel smooth and feel fast, and that's what we're trying to make sure we can help facilitate for the future, is a smooth, fast, easy transition.
I want to just go back to Steph's slide for one moment. One of the constraints that we see when sometimes it doesn't go fast is when a contractor gets something in their inbox that says from Steph Flores, who that contractor has never heard of, and it says DocuSign, like please DocuSign or something like that. Sometimes people see that and they think it is spam. They go, oh, I don't know who this person is, delete. And so what happens then is we just think it's like they're on vacation or it's waiting a while. And so it doesn't move forward at a good speed. And so one of the things that we sort of, I don't know if it's ask or encourage, is when you're working with a contractor, letting them know that they will get an email from Steph Flores that says DocuSign, so that when they get it, they don't think, oh, someone's trying to steal my bank account or make me open an attachment. They go, oh yeah, this is so that I can paint the walls at that site. Great, let me just sign it and get it moving. And then I also want to just open it up to others. Are there constraints that you see maybe when the document goes from CNDC to you or other times? I just am curious if there's things that could happen to make the process easier for you that we should know about. All right, hearing none, we'll move to the next slide. The next slide is called Creating a Strong Scope of Work. And the first question over on the left is, why do we care about a strong scope of work? And I know I've been in the process of putting contracts through, and sometimes it feels like a big pain to do this scope of work document. And I would encourage you to really think about the reason we're doing it is it protects you from paying for incomplete or unsatisfactory work. And it's also a way to communicate expectations between you and the contractor so that at the very beginning, we make sure that what you are thinking the contractor is going to do is what they're thinking they're going to do. We have certainly had a ton, you know, I mean, most of our contracts go off without a hitch. We hire someone, they do good work, we pay them, and everyone leaves the transaction feeling pretty happy. Occasionally, we hire someone, the work quality isn't what we'd like. Sometimes we intervene. Sometimes we realize our contract isn't strong enough to intervene. And sometimes we end up paying for a product that we don't feel super good about, right? We would have much rather used those hard-earned dollars a different way in our community than this contract that just didn't seem to get us what we were hoping. And so the why of that strong scope of work is if up front we have a very clear plan of what we're asking, we're more likely to feel good about what we're paying for. How many, with a show of hands, are you familiar with SMART goals? So sometimes they're used in employment, like when you're saying what your annual goals are for the year. Okay, so a lot of you. In many ways, a contract should be similar. The scope of work should be similar to SMART goals. It should be specific. So if there's specific time intervals, if there are specific work, if there's specific people that this person is going to interview, if there is a specific date that they're going to present on, if there's a specific format that they need to do work so that they can maybe submit plans to the city on. All of those things that are specific, if there's a specific set of trainings that they're going to attend, all of those should be called out so that it's very clear, yes, we expect this to come back to us on 11 by 17 paper because that is what our grant application is requiring, for example. And then measurable. So making sure the words are, you know, talking about leading and what the deliverables are and the time frame of the deliverables. Sometimes we'll see things like support and assist and help. And if our contractor doesn't do what we thought they should do, but our scope of work said they are supporting the process, you know, if they set up one phone call, that's supporting the process. It's not as much support as you would have liked. So one of the things I put on the left is when you're thinking about creating those scopes of work, some strong words that might help it be specific, that might help it be much measurable. We also want to think about attainable. We might get 3 bids, and if we get 2 bids for $15,000 and 1 bid for $1,000, our first thought might be, wow, look at all the money we could save if we just pay $1,000. But when you look at that scope of work and how much it should cost to do that, is it really attainable to do that work on $1,000? Because what we don't want to do is hire somebody for $1,000, have them get into it, waste time, and then come back to us and say, oh, I'm going to need another $6,000 to finish it because it's just a lot more work than I thought. So, you know, we always want a good deal, but if you don't actually think that good deal is attainable, there are contractors who sometimes will, on purpose, sort of put a low number in there, and then they'll come back and say, oh, I need more to do X and Y, or any little change you make, they'll say, oh, that change is, you know, I'm going to have to do, you're going to have to give me an extra $2,000 because of that change. So really think about the attainableness when you're looking at your quotes to say, yeah, this really is reasonable, or it's great that this one is so low, but I feel like that's not actually realistic. So relevant is one of the SMART goals. And for you guys, it should be, when you're thinking of relevant, is this a need? Is this, could I justify to my funder why I spent this money? So I don't generally see contracts come through that are not relevant. But for federal grants, for example, this is one of the, it has to be relevant or it's not allowable. The feds will say, yeah, we're not going to pay for it because it's not something you needed to do for the project. And then the other thing is making sure that the scope of work has time-based deliverables. especially if that's really important to you or your funder. So if your funder has said you need to do X and Y by January, make sure that your contract has X or Y by at least January, and I would probably say December or November, so that there's some flexibility if after you get what you think the contractor thinks is the final project, you want to go back to them and say, hey, could you tweak or change this? Sometimes if it's a very big contract, you might want to have interim steps. So if I was entering into a contract now to do work on my house, for example, instead of just saying, oh, this house will be built by January, I might want to say the plans are created by the end of September, and it's sent into the city by the end of October, and the construction starts early November. Because that way, along the way, if things are lagging, you can call it to their attention. But if you only say it has to be done by January, then you don't have a lot of control between now and January if you see the time frame slipping. So I'm going to share some strong contract words that I've put in, that I've created, and then I would love for you guys to maybe think of some that you think would also be good, strong contract words, and share those with the group as well. So instead of help or support, create, facilitate. So if they're going to be leading a meeting, make it clear that they are the facilitator. Design, so that means they're expected to create how this looks. Plan, maybe they're coming up with plans. Edit, in addition to delivering a document, for example, you might want to also include a round of edits so that if they come back to you and say, hey, here's the plan, you can give them feedback and they can edit and have a second iteration. Implement, deliver, manage, organize, write, execute, present. If they're going to be presenting public speaking, for example, you want that called out. Research, provide, recruit, revise. Some other things in terms of payments are payment after written acceptance of report. So if you pay them when they give you the report and the report is terrible, technically you need to pay them for that terrible report, and you may or may not be able to convince them to edit it and make it more closely aligned with what you had wanted. By X date is a really, really important words that I like to have in my contract, and due dates. What other strong words might you think of that you have put in to kind of share with others to think about in terms of contracting? I think what you are saying is that this list of strong words is so good that you guys don't need to add anything. But if you do, feel free to unmute yourself and add. And if you're having trouble, with the muting, let us know that. I'm looking in the chat to make sure there's not things in the chat that maybe we need to talk to. Yes, we will most certainly send a copy of these slides out. And I think the question about, does that mean for volunteers to the age 13 document, I think what Sandy's referring to is maybe working with kids, abuse prevention. Is that right, Sandy?
Right, you said that contractors are working with kids. It'd be good to have them look at those 13-page document. So I'm wondering, because all we do is work with kids. So I thought, do all my volunteers need to look at that document too?
Absolutely. And Sandy, if it would be helpful for you and helpful for others, we're happy to put on a similar training like this for your volunteers to say, here are the things that are important. You also could certainly just share that with them. You could lead a training, but really they need to know that it is never okay for them to text individually a teen, because that breaks our abuse prevention policy, and that actually would cause a break in our insurance policy should something happen due to that texting. So we really want to make sure that we're keeping kids safe most of all, and the organization safe.
Thank you.
And someone said, can we record that training to use over and over again? That is a great idea. And so I think that is something we will probably do as a result of you guys being on this call. And that way, if you want to give them the policy and ask them to look at it, that's great. If you want to have them watch it, that's great as well.
I also have, I have all our staff and volunteers have to read and agree to the policy regardless of whether they work with our youth or not. And then also I make them sign a document. In the beginning when we were first given that policy, there was a little webinar that they had to watch. And so I had them all sign off that they watched and understood it. And then I had them sign off that they received and had read and understood the abuse prevention policy.
Jay, that's really great. And, you know, I mentioned also kids, we talked about kids, and I should have really talked about vulnerable populations. I was going to say this is great for anyone who works with kids, but it's also great for those who work with maybe older individuals or individuals with disabilities. Those folks also need to know the abuse prevention policies. So I think Jay has a great sort of approach of just everyone's going to do it when they start as a volunteer, so that if their job duties shifts and maybe they used to work with adults, but now they're going to do something with the youth group, he's covered because he just right away said, yep, let's make you do that abuse prevention training and know our rules and policies. So that's a way that you could approach it if that made sense for your organization.
Well, and I think documentation is important too, because if anything were to come back, then you have something that said, yes, you signed that you read and understood this policy. So if there's a violation, it's on them and you're not responsible for their violation.
Absolutely. And the documentation can be email back and forth. So if you want to print that out and put that in their file, so showing that you sent the policy and showing that they said, yep, I've seen this. Yeah. It could be a variety, it could be a signature, it could be a variety of different things, but you're right, that is a nice thing to have at that documentation. Yeah. And then when you're writing your scope of work, I would sort of think of it as planning for a project. So I would list the steps that I think need to happen, the dates and times of things we know. So if we know that there's a meeting on this date, how many? So if you're doing focus groups, so if you're doing a focus group, how many folks do they need to recruit in that focus group? Certainly a focus group of 2 is different than a focus group of 20. The length of time. So if they're doing a focus group, is it supposed to be a half an hour or is it supposed to be 2 hours? Not that it has to be exactly 2 hours, but you want to give them an idea so that if they do 15 minutes, you could say, oh, this isn't really what we meant. Who must attend? So, and who needs to give input before something can go to the next stage? So if they're going to write a plan for something, maybe your strategic plan, where are you going to have decision points? Because they need to know that. If they just go into their bedroom and spend 2 days and they write your strategic plan, and you come back and say, well, I would have liked to weigh in on this. I don't think this is right. Our board needs to weigh in on this. You're going to have a problem because they put the time in without knowing what those decision points were. Feedback intervals. So do they need to bring something to you and have you approve it in order to move to the next stage? Or at what point, do you want them to check in with you every 2 weeks to tell you where they are, what they're having challenges with, what have been successes? Requirements from the funder, from you, or requirements that have to do with state law. So if you are going to be having somebody come to deliver food, one of the requirements is that they need to be in compliance with all the food servicing laws in your county. Approval is necessary, and the number of items. So if you're asking someone to write a plan, you don't know exactly how many pages it is, but you might want to put in there, the plan should be 6 to 8 pages. So you don't get a 1-pager that you paid $5,000 for. So all of those are considerations. Every situation is different, which is why writing a scope of work is challenging. I find that when I've worked with someone for a long time, so if I have a repeat contractor, it is sometimes harder for me to really focus on a smart and strong scope of work, because I go, oh, I've worked with Nellie forever. I trust her. She is so smart. She's the best of the best. I would encourage you to, even when you are working with the best of the best that you trust, to put your scope of work in writing in the instance that something happens in their life and maybe they're not really able to deliver this time because their mom is sick and they've been in Albuquerque. so that you still have a contract where you say, well, we're going to hold payment because we actually were expecting the focus group to not be 4 people. So I guess those are my sort of recommendations for a strong scope of work. And I appreciate Jay and others who've kind of, you know, chimed in and said, hey, here's another thing that we're doing. And I also just want to give you a little bit of time if anyone else wants to share a story or share something that they've done about scopes of work and how to make them stronger.
I'll also say that CNDC, you might have noticed in the last, I don't know, 6 to 8 months, that contracts sometimes are not going through quite as smoothly because we're trying to write better scopes of work than we have in the past. So that might be one of the things that you've noticed over the last couple of months. And if you haven't noticed, we are trying to build better scopes of work so that contracts are stronger moving forward. So you don't have to be an expert. You know, send what you have, and then we might reach back out to you and say, hey, we want to strengthen this. This is how we would strengthen it. Particularly for those larger dollar amounts. That might not happen for every contract because the liability might be low, but maybe when needed and when the dollar amount is high enough, you know, we would like to create them as strong as possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Steph. Next, we'll move to compensation options. And this is something that I see a lot of disconnects with. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at some, there's a lot of different ways you can compensate your contractor. But here are the most common. And sometimes you might have a hybrid of these things. So an hourly rate. One that works best when things are being done by one individual. So essentially you say, hey, you're gonna write this plan and we'll pay you $50 per hour. You'll invoice us based on how many hours you worked. And sometimes you might even put a cap on it. You might say, we'll pay you $50 per hour up to $4,000. And then that contractor is taking on some risk saying, yep, if it exceeds $4,000, I will do the work, you know, without billing you. So hourly rate is a good way to go. Most contractors are very, very comfortable with that. So it's a very good, a good way to go. It gets more complex though if you maybe a whole team is working on things, because the administrative assistant might only be making $15 an hour. And the principal at that firm might be making $90 an hour. And so if you just say there's an hourly rate, they might just put their administrative assistant on for, you know, that they're paying $15 an hour, and they might be charging you $95 an hour. So you want to be careful if you're having an hourly rate over a project that requires various different individuals at various different pay scales. The other thing about the hourly rate is you're going to want to indicate what increments they use. So if they work for 61 minutes, is that 1 hour of work or is that 2 hours of work because they went into the next minute? I would say, you know, law firms, they, for example, cut their increments into very small increments. 15 or 30-minute increments seem to be appropriate. So if someone works 20 minutes, that's closer to 30 minutes. And if they work 14 minutes, it's closer to not counting as all if you did 30-minute increments, but making sure that that's in the contract so it's clear. Another mechanism that you might use is, look, I don't care how long it takes you to do this work. I want you to do a focus group, and after you do a focus group with 40 individuals, I will pay you $500. And so essentially, then you say, so what is the deliverable? It might be that they provide a report listing the individuals they interviewed and the findings that they had. And once they give you that report, you give them the amount of money you agreed upon, and it doesn't matter how much time. So if they're incredibly fast and efficient and they've got a great network, they might be able to do that for real quick and make a large, you know, amount of money per hour. If it takes them longer, their money per hour, you know, ultimately is lower, but you essentially are just saying, I'm paying $500 for this project. Another way that you might pay someone, and this is common if someone is doing similar amounts of work every month, that's fairly, it's not going to deviate strongly. So would be a monthly fee. So every month you are going to write 2 grants for me. You can estimate, okay, so that's probably 20 hours of work over that monthly thing, and I'm going to pick a salary amount. I'm going to give you $1,000 for that 20 hours of work. It doesn't work well if 1 month they're going to be writing 2 huge federal grants that require 80 hours a week to work on. That's obviously not going to be in their best interest or your best interest, because they're not going to do a great job if they're only getting paid $1,000 for that. So a monthly fee works really well for a lot of web things. So if someone is doing some kind of behind the scenes work on your website, monthly fee is good. Certain types of contracting, edits, maybe preparing materials for your board of directors, those are all things that a monthly fee is pretty good for, because it'll be a pretty similar set amount of work every month. And then they don't have to track, oh, this was 27 hours, that was 29 hours. It just is a really easy monthly payment. And then sometimes you want to hire someone and you don't quite know what they're going to be doing, because maybe they need to create a plan and then implement that plan. And we don't know what that plan is going to say. In that case, you might start with an hourly rate for the writing of the plan. And then you might say that once the plan is written and they are implementing some of the pieces of the plan, you will kind of have them come to you with a scope of work and a cost for each piece. So if they're going to help you with your early childhood plan, first they're going to come together with a plan, and then when they're trying to implement it with you, they're going to come and say, okay, in order to do this work to make sure that we are providing outreach to everyone in our community, we think we're going to need to do these 7 events, and we're going to need to make sure that we're known by this 6 organizations, and we're going to want to do a media buy. And so then they might say, so this piece of it is going to be $1,000. And if your scope is written well, then you don't have to do an amendment to your contract. You certainly can do an amendment to your contract if you don't know sort of what it's going to look like. But you can also certainly say, you know, we need to have a written scope of work and cost prior to commencement of each piece. So I have a contract in place with them. When we decide exactly what the work looks like, they will write me up an estimate, and I will say in writing, yes, this makes sense, and it will be approved. And in that case, then you as the project director, or your project director, if you're working for a project director, would be the person who would be approving the scope and the cost. And then the last model that I have is a hybrid of the models above, which I think was just an example that I used, where you pay an hourly rate for the writing of the plan, and then when the implementation, since you don't know what that looks like, you're going to make it approval of scope and cost before you start those pieces. Any questions on those different compensation models? Then I will share 2 of the things that I see that sometimes causes me to go back to our partners and say, hey, we need to pick one or the other. I will often see a contractor who will say, I am going to do this job. I'm going to be paid at an hourly rate. The job will take 100 hours, and so I will be getting $10,000. So their hours, so they'll say it's $10,000 for this thing at an hourly rate of $100. That's problematic because the compensation really needs to be tied to either an hourly rate or a payment for the deliverables. Because the odds that the exact number of hours that they estimate to do the project are going to be exactly what they need is frequently low. And so what if you're paying them $100 per hour, but instead of it taking them 100 hours, it takes them 120 hours? Then do we give them the payment that they said it would be in total, or do we pay them the hourly rate? So we really need, it can say, here's the hourly rate, and we estimate it will be this cost, or here's the hourly rate, and we will not exceed this cost, but it can't say an hourly rate and a payment for the work, because if those 2 don't line up, we don't know how to pay them. Another thing that we frequently see is when you do the ICQ document, so that's the document where it says, is this person going to be paid on a social security number or an EIN? Are they going to be paid hourly? We'll often see, no, they're not going to be paid hourly. And then interestingly enough, when we see the scope of work, we see that they are paid hourly. So we need those 2 things to match. So just keep that in mind as you're filling out your forms and talking to your contacts. And then next we have a little game, making strengthening scopes of work fun. I have a scope of work listed, a statement of work that describes some work, and it describes sort of the contract period and the payment. And I want you to read the scope of work, and then we'll give you everyone a couple minutes to read it and think about it and take some notes. And then we want folks to share how they could make this statement of work stronger. So the scope of work is on the screen. Read through it and see if you have ideas to make it, to strengthen it. And I'm going to be doing the same thing while we do it. All right, can you a show of hands of who needs more time? Perfect, we'll just add a couple of minutes on. All right, I'm really excited to see how you guys can use the skills that we just sort of talked about and learned to strengthen this scope of work, which has been edited just a little bit, but was an actual scope of work that came through for a project. So how can we make this scope of work stronger?
I would say the census outreach doesn't tell us, there's no, it's not quantifiable, like how many,
yep,
you know, how many engagements is it, you know, is it bringing people together into one room, or is it how many posts are you doing on social media, etc.?
Yes, how many posts, what is the length of the post? Is there a specific community we're hoping to reach? Are we hoping to reach older people? Are we hoping to reach those who don't speak English? What is the length of those communications? Is it 20-word tweets? I don't even know how the limit for a tweet, that might be too many characters for a tweet. Or is it brochures and white papers? That statement of work is very soft for the census outreach. What other things do we see with the census outreach or with any of the other pieces?
Maybe identify social media like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, which social media are going to be used and how.
Right. What are your expectations?
I think also creating the actual messages for each of the platforms, having them out there saying you will do one for each day for 2 weeks or whatever. Something maybe, I don't know if you want to spend the money on like Facebook ads, but that type of thing, exploring Facebook ads and implementing those or whatever. So I was thinking about that.
And approval, right? If we have somebody, like, do they have the approval to just put those messages out, or do you want to see them first? You are sort of who the buck stops for. Do you want to make sure what someone's posting on your social media account, or are you just going to give them the keys? Either are okay, but it's something to think about and put in your scope of work.
And I'd just like to add something. Just making sure that the deliverables are like that there is a specific date, because if you don't, they could give you everything the last month of the contract, and it's just, you're waiting and waiting, and it's not so good.
Right. If I get 10 social media posts on June 30th, that's less helpful than if I've spaced them out. Looks like this is a 2-month contract over those 2 months.
And also, really what their roles and responsibilities are as far as the work, like who's going to do what, really, and how much of the work. I've gotten into a contract where it was kind of, they were hired as the expert, but then every time I said, what are we doing? It was kind of like, well, you guys are the experts in your community, so you need to tell me. And it's like, no, that's what I hired you for. So just be really careful about that.
Right. So maybe some strong words for that would be provide recommendations and an implementation plan versus them just giving you feedback. What thoughts about grant writing and proposal submissions? Is there a way to make that stronger?
I would say something like write grant proposal to be reviewed by and approved by the staff by such and such date for the first draft.
Yes. So putting in a review, putting in a date, maybe making sure that they know who they're writing a grant proposal. So one for $5,000 from the Denver Foundation is going to be very different than if you're expecting them to write a federal grant application, right? So just making sure that it's clear what you're asking them.
I also think with the grant writing piece, like what pieces are, like you said, what pieces are they responsible for? Are they responsible for the report that goes with the grant? Are they responsible for collecting all of the attachments that go with it? I mean, just being very, very clear about, there's so many pieces to grant writing, like which ones belong to them.
Right. And I think, I can't see names, but I think that was Whitney, springboarding on what Whitney says. So you might want to sit down with them with the grant and sort of first have a meeting where you say, oh, I think we should, this section should sort of, talk about how this, this should be our answer to this, and this should be our answer to that. You guys do have some expertise, and you want to make sure that you're just not giving this all to a grant writer who might not know as much about educating young people about music and teaching them how to be in an orchestra than you do. And how could we strengthen that onboarding new staff section?
Maybe some deliverables like how many staff and what you're actually doing with the onboarding, rather than just general, here's some new staff, onboard them.
Right. So what are, at the end of your onboarding, what are their competencies going to be? Are they going to know how to use your computer system? Are they going to know how to file for a reimbursement? Are they going to, understand who to interact with on this grant? Onboarding new staff is that's very vague. And it would be easy to say, well, I showed them the copy machine, took them to the bathroom and showed them the refrigerator. Where's my $5,000? Speaking of the $5,000, are there any concerns you have about the contract amount just being listed as $5,000?
It doesn't have deliverables listed with that. It doesn't say whether it's hourly or which type of payment style it would be.
Exactly. Is this person expecting to get $5,000 up front? Are they planning to bill you at an hourly rate? Is it on June 30th you give them the $5,000? Are they expecting $2,500 each of the 2 months that they're working? All of these are questions that this scope of work did not answer when it was sent. And I'm going to do a time check to see if we are at time.
We're a little bit over, but you guys have so many great ideas. I've been typing into the box some of the questions that you've been bringing up for how to strengthen the different pieces of the scope of work. And I think that there's a way to send out questions or send out the chat afterwards, or I'm happy to compile it just as you start rewriting your scopes of work for future contracts. You can take a quick, look through the list and say, oh, I did not tie this compensation to deliverables. That's an easy fix that I know strengthens it. So I'll kind of compile those notes afterwards. Question?
I was just going to mention, Steph, that at the bottom of the chat, there's 3 dots and you can save the chat right there.
Thank you. You're saving me a Google search. I don't know everything, but Google does, so.
All right, let's move to our next slide. And we're going to do 2 exercises. We'll do this one in sort of warp speed. So I'll give you a minute to look at it. We'll go over it for a couple minutes and then we'll move on. I'm sorry, I'm behind. All right, start providing feedback.
Oh, they need to get input from you guys, the organization, what needs to be on the website, get the content.
Yeah.
Due date.
How many pages there will be, what do those pages look like, due date.
What if they don't finish it in 31 hours?
Right.
Yes, that cost is absolutely not appropriate. It has to either be $35 per hour or $1,085.
And it's also mixing the type of payment with a deliverable. The hour per hour, but also a deliverable.
Yep. So great job. I don't want to waste our time, so we'll move on. But these are 2 scopes of work that we have seen, and you guys would know how to strengthen them. So I'm very glad about that.
Oh, Minnie. I swear if I get Chico's and Roberts.
Oh, we can hear someone talking about Chico's, so you might want to mute.
Get out some too, though. We would like that.
Yes, and it's happened to all of us. Next, we are going to introduce, you guys probably all know her, because anyone who's been hired through CNDC has gotten to sit down with Debbie and have her walk them through and orient them. But Debbie is our HR manager and sort of expert and really knows how to keep us out of trouble because she knows all the rules that the IRS is going to come back to look at to say, did we classify this person correctly or are we going to owe them a bunch of money? So with that, I will introduce Debbie to talk about ITQs.
And Debbie, is it helpful if I pull it up? I think you're on mute.
Yes, that would be very helpful.
Perfect. I will pull that up. Just let me figure out how to reshare this. Never the expert, but always try hard,
So the independent contractor questionnaires are needed when the contractor is going to be using their social security number in terms of how we pay them. It's kind of like their tax identifying number. And this is really important because if they're using their social security number, then it's going towards their social security number. If it's an employee identification number, typically that's their own consulting firm It's their own tax identifier, etc. So if it's an employee social security number, then we have to go through and we have to do the independent contractor. So, and it's really important to be specific and careful as to how we do things, because you want to make sure that the work that the independent contractor is doing what an independent contractor should do. Sometimes we get contracts in for administrative assistance. That is not something you would hire an independent contractor to do. That is an employee type job. And up at the top of that, it talks about, you know, generally when an individual is an independent contractor, the organization has the right to control the direct results, but not the means of how it's going to get accomplished. So there's not a lot of direct supervision. There's not a lot of oversight. It's like the last example, you're going to give somebody work to develop a website. It's a specific thing that they're going to do, they're going to accomplish, you're going to pay them, and you're going to move on. So we want to be careful to make sure that you know, the people that are doing independent contract work, that it really is independent contract work and not employee work. And if you have questions, you know, obviously always reach out, and I'm more than happy to have that conversation as to, you know, what does this look like? As it says on the form, there are serious tax and legal implications for misclassifying independent contractors. So that's why we want to be really careful that the work that they're going to be doing does fall under the scope of what an independent contractor would do. So where it says the scope of work and duration of services, you can kind of bullet point this. I mean, particularly if you already have a scope of work developed, you don't need, you can just see reference scope of work and kind of what the duration of services is going to look like. Is it 6 months? Is it 10 months? Is it 30 days? Will you oversee the actual work or instruct the individual as to how the work will be performed? This should always be, you are going to look at it from a high level in terms of what it is they're going to do. You are not going to be providing them day-to-day guidance. You are not going to be telling them how to do their work. I mean, sometimes it's going to be specific because it's going to be, you know, they need to do this work on certain days for meetings that you already have calendarized, but that still fits with the overall assumption of independent contractor is that they're providing you a service on a date and stuff. So this way, yeah, so you just want to stay at a high level. You just want to make sure that when you're doing this, and you're filling out this form, okay? The contractor is not filling out this form. You are filling out this form based on what this person is going to come in and do for you. Does the individual have their own independent trade or profession? A lot of times they have their own consulting firms, which is always good to show. If they don't, I wouldn't put a lot of information around why they don't. It's just, you know, yes or no, and then kind of move on with that. If they have a consulting firm, then I would indicate they do consulting for a lot of other businesses, etc. So here's where it gets kind of tricky too, is hourly pay is typically not allowable for independent contractors. Do you plan to pay this independent contractor hourly? When you pay people hourly, a lot of times that has a tendency to equate to, you know, an employee type relationship that you're paying them for hours for work. So typically they like to see that you're going to pay them a lump sum for this bucket of work that they're going to do. Or this scope of work is broken down into 3 different buckets, and at the end of that, with the deliverables that have been done, that is how you're going to pay them. So I would just think carefully before you're paying somebody hourly. And I would say, you know, typically if you have a consultant, some consultants will do hourly, but they're usually, you know, $50 an hour type of thing to show the expertise that they bring to the organization and stuff. So I would just caution you on this. You know, you don't want to see, you know, even the $35 example, Julie, was, you know, that's still kind of low a little bit for what you're wanting contractors to do. So I think you just want to be careful when you're doing this as to if you're going to pay them hourly, do you have a good reason why you're paying them hourly, and you're not going to pay them like a lump sum in a bucket. And you may have a really good reason why it needs to be hourly. But I think if you can kind of steer away from that, that just builds the credibility of the independent contractor that you're trying to do. Has the individual performed similar work for other organizations? This one, I think you can say, yes, you know, they have their own consulting firm, they work with other organizations, and sometimes it just might be no, they have not worked. And again, I would not get into an explanation as to why they haven't. Remember, this is one of those things that if we get audited from the Department of Labor as to why we misclassified this, the more information on here sometimes is not as helpful as less information, if that's helpful. Will the contractor provide their own tools, material, and equipment? Most of the time they should be doing their own, they should have their own computer, they should have their own, you know, what it is they need to do, the scope of work that they have contracted with you to do. They should have all of that. Now, sometimes with the translators that the trust communities use, they use the materials and equipment that the trust community has purchased, and that's okay. But for the most part, they should have their own tools and materials and stuff. And then the last one is will the independent contractor determine their own schedule? The answer to this 99% of the time should be yes, because they need to, you have given them the scope of work they need to do. The when, the how they do it is what you're paying them for. You as an independent contractor, you can't get in the middle and say, well, today you need to do this, tomorrow you need to do this, because if that's the type of relationship it's going to be, then really it's more of an employee type relationship rather than a contractor relationship. Does that make sense? Okay. Are there any questions?
Oh, I often see people not know how to answer number 8 if the contractor is doing something like maybe they are getting paid to attend these 3 meetings and then prep the board on it. So people don't know how to, for their own schedule, like we're sort of giving them the meetings, but does that still, are they still sort of determining their own schedule because they're saying, yes, I can do this or not? Or how would you answer it in that situation?
Yes, yeah. I would say, you know, in this one you could say, refer to scope of work. You know, will they determine their own schedule? Yes, to review or view scope of work for dates of meetings required to attend.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah. Any other questions? Well, that's really quiet.
Thank you for coming on, Debbie.
Yep. You guys have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you later.
Great.
And obviously, if you have any questions, let me know.
All right. And next we are going to talk, excuse me, about CNDC's procurement policy. Because you are all projects of CNDC, this is also your procurement policy. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. It can be found on our help desk. It can be found with the link that's right there. But I'll go over some of the basics. It's long and involved. But the basic things we want to make sure is that ethics are used in purchasing. So you aren't purchasing your computers from Shop X because Shop X has said, and if you buy 10 computers from us, we'll give you 1 for your own personal use, right? That's a conflict of interest and not how money that's been raised in the nonprofit sector should be used. We also want to make sure that there's free and open competition. So that, you know, is, you know, we realize we develop relationships, but we want to be making sure that we're not just always using one vendor, and especially if we happen to know that vendor, that becomes even more complex, right? Like if that vendor is my friend. So we really require 3 price quotes for anything that's between 3,500 and up to 1,500. If it's below 3,500, it's still great to get 3 price quotes, and depending on your monetary source, if it's government funds, you might be required to. But really, those are the limits where you need 3 price quotes, and I would keep them. I would screenshot it if I was going on, you know, looking at Amazon and Best Buy and someone else. Just making sure that, well, actually, those are good, so that, oh, actually, the procurement policy is for goods and services. And it can be complicated, right? If you're doing a website design and someone has done website design for you, and then you have to get 3 price quotes, we get that doesn't always feel good. It doesn't mean you have to go with the cheapest one. You might go, hey, I asked Phoebe, Nellie, and Rhonda for price quotes, but Rhonda has done the first part of our website. And so even though she's $100 more than Nellie and $150 more than Phoebe, we're gonna go with her because she has that institutional knowledge and it's within the range. But if Rhonda's is $2,000 more than Nellie and Phoebe, then perhaps you make a different decision. We already talked about federal funds sometimes have higher thresholds or different things you have to do. We talked about keeping documentation. If you have something over $150,000 and you need to do a request for proposals, we're not going to get into this in this webinar. Just talk to your program officer at CNDC and we'll figure out how to move that forward. And then we also, especially right now, as we're looking at all of the injustices that we're seeing across the United States, if you're able to purchase from women and minority-owned business owners, that's a great way to sort of be promoting equity with the dollars you spend. And then last, if there's an emergency, so your rain is pouring through the roof of your building and you need to get that repaired, you don't have to get those 3 price quotes. You just need to document that there was an emergency, or there are hungry people and you needed to get food to them. And there was, you know, you can act quickly in an emergency, but an emergency only lasts so long, right? So for the first week, maybe you're buying food from the local restaurant. But if you're feeding people in a sustained way over time, then you probably do want to at some point be doing price quotes and making sure that you're in line with the procurement policy. I think the next slide is just, what are your questions?
Can I add something to the price quote section / documentation?
Yes.
So when you're putting through a contract with a high dollar amount in particular, we might ask you for a copy of your documentation. That's just to make it easier for our team if an audit does come in and say, hey, what was this $90,000 contract for? Did you get, you know, how did you follow the procurement policy? Show us your documentation. Then we're not going back to a project director 8 months after the fact saying, hey, do you have this documentation from so long ago? So while you're putting it through, we might ask you for that documentation so that we kind of catch it on the front end versus the back end. So just be aware of that in case it happens. And I see a question from Whitney. I've kind of been monitoring this chat box. If we are questioning a contract that is already in place, what process should we go through to make changes that align to these guidelines? Awesome. Feel free to email. Well, Julie, do you think the next step for that would probably be to email either of us or the contracting email so that we could take a look at the contract and look at your concerns?
I would actually often have this. So often when you make a mistake, a phone call is better than an email. So you can email. I know I have worked places where someone has realized they haven't followed the procurement policy, and it wasn't really an ideal situation. So sometimes we were able to say, well, why didn't we follow it? Oh, we didn't follow it. There was a recent example, and in fact, we didn't contract with them before this, but we were using a particular person to do, I think, some evaluation. I can't remember. Oh, some communications work. And when we said, did you get bids? The person said, well, no, we didn't, but we have a good reason for not getting bids. And it was that this person had already pro bono in the previous year created a whole system and like website and everything else And she had provided like $20,000 worth of work to do this website but she owned the website essentially. So if we were going to use a different contractor, they would have to start from square one and do all of the work that this person had done over the last year. And so in that circumstance, and that was federal money, so it was very important to document. We documented how much work had been done, what would have to be redone if we bid it out to another company, what her rates were, and then we looked at some rates online of similar services to show that she was well within and quite frankly underneath what the market rate was. And so it wouldn't have been ideal to bid it out. It would have been kind of awkward with that contractor who had been doing this work, which is not to say we don't sometimes bid out work even when it is awkward with a contractor. But we were sort of far enough down the road that we felt like this would meet our federal requirements to show that yes, we were, we weren't giving someone government money in an unfair process. We were really giving someone money who was giving us a price break, who had done a bunch of work for us in the past, and that this really was probably the best bang for our buck that we could get. So sometimes we can document it in a certain way, or maybe they're the only provider who does this kind of work, and so then we can do documentation around sole source. Sometimes though, we just didn't do we just didn't follow the procurement policy, even though when we sent in the form to Steph that said, have you followed the procurement policy, we checked yes. And then I've seen instances where you might go back and you might get some documentation showing what other prices are. And in some instances, I don't think this is quite ideal. In some instances, maybe you had a hotel in Cherry Creek and now you're like, oh, I didn't price compete that. In some instances, you might want to find 2 other hotels in Cherry Creek and just print off their rates. And certainly if you look at the Westin and the Ritz-Carlton in Cherry Creek, it's going to be cheaper than the Sheraton. So maybe that's a way that you have your, get your documentation that you need. It's not really ideal. The ideal way to do it is to really be shopping around for prices when you're doing this work. But if you realize you didn't, there's a variety of solutions we can use to try to get your documentation into place. And sometimes we just have to be prepared to say to the auditor, yep, you know what, we didn't do that. We hope this isn't an audit finding, but you're right, we should have followed our policy.
And Julie, any of our project directors, oh, sorry, I'm getting a wicked echo. In case any of our project directors are thinking specifically about strengthening scopes of work for past contracts, if they're like, oh, like I'm already in the middle of a contract with someone and I feel like this is an opportunity to like re-clarify what the deliverables should be, would that be an email that they could send to say, hey, is it too late to amend this contract so that we can create some clarity around it?
It certainly would be an email. It is hard once a contract is signed to come back and put more specifications in the contract. So sometimes that might be just a meeting with the contractor where you're saying, hey, I don't think I outlined my expectations enough. Here are some of the things I'd like. What do you think about this? Sometimes we are able to stop a contract and say we need to amend it, make it stronger. So that's definitely an email or a phone call because yes, sometimes we do need to, sometimes as we get into the work, we realize it's more complex than we thought and we do need to think about amending those scopes.
Perfect. Sandy, question.
I had one question, but after everything you just said, I have 2 more questions too. Is it okay if I'll do one, that if anyone else has questions, raise your hand, then we'll. So the first thing is whenever we have schools that want to start a bionic team, we send a bionic in a box with some goodies and some things to run the team. Now, before I was just buying things separately and threw them in a box and sent them. Now I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, a virtual conference where these people do these types of boxes, and we can get a $250 discount. So I just talked with him the other day, finding out what kind of quotes. And I have another company that we've printed or we've done some mugs from and stuff. So I asked them, do I have to find another company now to be able to check this out? Okay.
It would be ideal. So if you know what you're purchasing, it would be ideal to look at 3 companies. So to say, what are the prices for this? Now, if there's only one company that sort of boxes these and sends them out, that makes it easier. I suspect there's a lot of companies who might do that. You also might say, oh, I couldn't find another company who boxed them out, but I can tell you that the cost for my mugs would be X, the cost for my shipping would be around Y, and you can kind of type up a paragraph to say, we couldn't find an exact match to this. One of our other alternatives is to spend this amount per box, but it also requires a bunch of my time. And so even though it's $20 more per box to use this company, we're going to select that because when we evaluate what our time is worth and where my capacity is, it makes sense for us to outsource this.
Okay.
So we really do want to make sure that there are those 3 quotes. Assuming it's over, that's good. So assuming it's over that $3,500 threshold. If it's under that $3,500 threshold, then don't worry about it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Hop in, Sandy.
Okay, so for example, when I go to a conference that's put on by a national association, typically they have the hotel for the conference. And so maybe I could find a Motel 6 that's 5 miles away. Do I have to do that?
No. If there is a reasonable person, if they were going to a conference, would stay at the conference center. So the only time you would maybe want to do that is if you were not staying at the conference center and you were staying at the Westin, then you might want to say, oh, the reason I was staying at the Westin was because it was nicer than the Sheraton and the same price.
Okay, all right. And then the other thing is how do I find places to get the quotes from? If this is something new I'm doing, it's like, how do I know something like those boxes? If I didn't know companies or something, I mean, I know we can do Amazon things, but if there's something unique, if I have to get, I can't think of something. Anyway, do you guys have a list of types of people that offer things?
So you can ask Steph and I, because we see a lot of contracts coming through. So if you say, do you know some grant writers? We see the contracts that are coming through for a lot of different grant writers. You also can use our listserv, because sometimes the best people to ask are the other project directors. So saying, hey, has anyone had to, hire an illustrator who is, does sort of Japanese anime type of work? Project directors might be the best. And then sometimes you really don't know and you just have to go to our friend Google or Bing, if that's your preferred web folk, and just see what you can find online.
Okay, thank you guys.
All right.
Any other questions? Well, I wanted to do a quick overview of Formsite, if that sounds okay. I'll go real fast, but I know that a lot of people haven't had to use it very much. Maybe you don't put through many contracts, but you're going to be putting through one in the near future, so you wanted to kind of get ready. Can you guys see the contract initiation form? Mm-hmm. Perfect. So I'll send this link out. I'll also send it in the email. It's on our online help desk, and it's also on the auto reply if you emailed contracts. But if you ever need it, just email us and let us know. I actually just save it on my bookmarks so that I can't lose it. So I have it up here on my bookmark bar. But I'll kind of run through what it would look like. So I'm a project director. I'm getting ready to hire someone. And bye Phoebe, thanks for coming. And feel free to sign off if you need to. I know we're right up against the time. Julie, did you want to say something?
I just want to say we would also really love for you to take just a minute of your time. I think it's 5 questions, but evaluate this so we can see what we can do better. If this is helpful for you, we don't want to waste your time. So if these trainings aren't helpful, we will try to make them better or not do them. So we would really appreciate it.
Yep, and that's in the chat box. Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to pretend that I'm going to be doing a contractor without their own contract, which means we're just going to be using our independent contractor agreement. So this is CNDC's legally created agreement. Today's date is the 12th. I can't believe it's already June. My name is Steph. My email address. My project name. I'm going to say test because I'm not creative right now. Who is getting paid? Let's see. I think Nahomi's going to get paid today. Nahomi, you are welcome. I need to put her email address in. This is really important. A lot of people are just putting in their name again, which means I have to reach back out and say, hey, what's Nahomi's email address? So please make sure you're putting in her email address. And if I have the address, I can put it in. And if I have the address, as the project director, I'm also going to put her address in because that's a field on our ICA form. So if I have the address, I'm going to say, you know, she lives at 900 Eudora. And I just found something we'll need to change. I don't know why this box is here, so I'm going to ignore it. But I am going to type something because it looks like a required field. This also should not be here. And this also should not be here. So we'll be editing that later. This box that's popping up, hold on. Okay. Okay, the amount is going to be $300. And I'm going to show you what it looks like to use a social security number because this automatically generates the ICQ questions that Debbie was talking about. So when you say that someone is using an EIN, so you're using an actual firm or business, etc., those questions don't pop up. You don't need to complete them, but you do need to complete them if you're paying an individual directly, as Debbie mentioned. So the form that we were looking at is actually just now on this form. So the same questions are here. Will I oversee the work? No. They are responsible for the work, whatever. Does the individual have their own trade? Yes. Consultant. Has Naomi performed similar work before? Yes. She's the expert. Hourly pay is not typically allowed. Are we going to pay them hourly? No, because I know that a stronger contract is deliverable based. Will the contractor provide their own tools? Yes, she has everything. Will the independent contractor determine their own schedule? Yes. Determine it herself. Did we follow the policy? Well, since it's a $300 contract, I know that the policy did not require me to get other quotes for this work, so I can say yes confidently. If you ever need to see the policy, it's hyperlinked right here. Or if you need to get this form to us and then you need to clarify whether you follow the policy or not, but you at least want us to kind of start the contracting on the back end, feel free to send the form and we can always, you know, talk after the fact. Will this contract be paid with federal funds? Nope, we're good to go. Active date, it's going to start on the 30th. It does have an end date. So a lot of contracting work will have an end date. That's how it'll be easy to tie to deliverables, but sometimes it won't. But this is just going to be a 1-month contract. This is where I'm going to put the scope of work. So let's see. Website design and management. This is just my brief one, $300. And this is where I'd put the full scope of work. And that's just because this box feeds into a specific box on our Salesforce record that doesn't have a lot of characters. Most of the time, you'll probably just scroll down here and you'll actually attach a full scope of work down here. So I'm going to pretend I'm attaching a scope of work so that I can stop completing that box. She's not going to be working with vulnerable populations. Remember that a vulnerable population is going to be defined here. If you're not sure, we'll reach out to kind of say, well, what does their work look like? If she's working on a website, is she going to be in the office while you have kids there or while you have, you know, folks with disabilities, etc.? We can help you kind of talk through that piece. I know that I want to code it to a specific grant, so I'm going to put that here. And I know that she prefers an EFT payment because checks are harder to cut when we are working from home and we want to get Naomi paid. And it's going to be an expense form because it's just a one-time expense. And then maybe, I have no notes for today, but maybe if you did, that's where you'd put them. Like for example, hey, I want to make sure this piece is clear. Is this clear in the scope of work? And then you submit it. Here I am, needing an email address. You'd submit it, and this form goes directly to our contracts email box, which I check. So as soon as these forms come in, we start working on your contract and we're putting the pieces together so that Julie can do her final review. You can always print a receipt if you need to, but you do not need to. And then anytime you want to follow up on a contract, you know, you could just email us at contracts@cndc.org. But as soon as this piece goes off, we're on the back end working. So the Formsite piece is supposed to be super easy, but if you have any questions while you're filling it out, you can always give us a call and we're happy to walk through that document with you. Any closing thoughts, Julie?
I would just say, because you can't save Formsite midway through, so making sure that you have the email address, the scope of work, and asking the contractor, hey, do you have an EIN, or are you going to be using your social security number, so that you get that right and don't have to redo it. Because I don't know about other people, but when I have to redo work that I already did, I usually am a little more cranky.
And Sandy's asking a good question. So what if you just want to amend a contract or extend a contract you already have in place? So you'll just click contract amendment and you'll see that the questions change and the form gets a little bit shorter because you're just going to say, hey, this is a contract we already have in place. So that's how you do that. And then you could also do an office space lease on here, and the questions will change kind of with each form. And then if they have their own contract, you would also send it through here. It would be preferable that they come through the contract initiation form. I'll be entirely honest, it's to save us a little bit of time so that we can be faster for you. So it pulls specific information from here directly into the Salesforce record that we have to use to do our review process. So it just saves us time, which means we can process them more efficiently for you. So we would prefer to get vendor supplied contracts through here as well versus via email. And I thank you in advance for trying to keep it smooth for all of our 65 projects.
And then last, I think we just want to encourage you to fill out the survey for this. And also we just want to thank you for your time. I know that everyone is super busy. And so I hope that when you have to do a contract, this saves you some time on that end, this investment. But we really appreciate having you with us.
Oh, Sandy?
Thank you. Great information.
I wanted to say this because this may affect a lot of us. We were supposed to have a board retreat in March. We had to cancel it because of COVID. So now we're changing the date. Do we have to change the contract since it's a different date and everything? Just wondering about that.
Are you working with the hotel?
No, it's actually we're going to do part of it online now. So yeah, no, we were going to be just meeting one of our board members' homes before.
So if it's a pretty small change, like a date change, I would recommend you might just email CNDC contracts or contracts@cndc.org and ask, because if everything else is the same and it's the date, we might be able to just use that. We probably will still amend it if there's a payment so that they don't think that they're supposed to deliver their service on March 2nd.
Yeah.
But probably since that's already passed, they haven't delivered the services.
Right. Thank you.
Jay, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation because it's all been extremely useful information. And even though I've done bits and pieces of all the things you've talked about, having a more cohesive idea of what's going on is helpful to me.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice the way it's packaged together. Yeah. Our pleasure. We really are partners in this and want to be getting this right with you and wanting you guys to be able to do strong scopes of work. So thank you guys so much for the partnership, and we hope that we have to bother you less because we don't love interrupting your important work to say, what's the email address?
I'm kind of used to that because you know there's always something that I'm either leaving out or not getting quite right or not defining well enough, and it's really helpful to me to get that kind of nudge, like, oh, we need this, or we need this information, or what are you actually doing? And it helps.
Yes. Well, we'll keep nudging you, but we hope to see some improvement from ourselves and all of us. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Happy Friday.